Hello everyone, my name is Trish Lynch from IOHR in London. Thank you for being with us for another episode of our Human Rights TV. The Rwandan genocide happened 24 years ago, resulting in an estimated 500,000 to 1 million Rwandans killed over a 100-day period. The gruesome images that surface still haunt more than 2 million displaced Rwandan refugees and those living outside the country. With us today is Anaïs Mutumba, a freelance journalist and communications consultant who luckily left a month before the borders closed and the massacre began. Ms. Mutumba, good to have you with us. Thank you for sharing with us your expertise on this genocide, on the anniversary. Now, timing really is everything because, as I said in the introduction, you and your family luckily left a month before the borders closed and the massacre began. Did you have any idea what was about to happen? Because the Hutu and the Tutsi, it's always been a powder keg between the two of them. But did you know that this was going to happen and that it was going to be so appalling?
So, yes and no. So in a way, no, because we were in Congo at the time. And where we were in Congo, the Congolese people also got involved in the genocide. But there was something stirring in Congo, but nothing that indicated what was coming. And at the time we only left because my mom thought we should get a better education. And at the age of 6, I was convinced that I was going to be a vet. And my mom thought you can't really be a vet in Rwanda because they didn't at the time keep pets, and same in Congo. Not in the same way they do here in the West. And so we moved to South Africa and it was all over the news there. And suddenly we were faced with, oh my gosh, what's happening? So we were able to call family members and tell them to try and get out.
Many people believe that it was inevitable that this was going to happen. Are you one of those?
Yes, there are two camps that believe how it all started. So one think it was because the plane was shot down with our president, who was a Hutu, as well as the Burundi president, as well as everybody else on board. And they thought that that's what started everything. And I feel like it was a build-up over a long period of time.
Now let's go back in time, because at one period in history, these two peoples had a lot in common. They were cattle farmers. Those that had a lot of cattle were given the title of Tutsi, and those that had less were given the title of Hutu. And then the Germans came in and they decided that the Tutsis looked more European and gave them the important jobs, which obviously put the back of the Hutus up. Tell me what happened after that, what unfolded after that to make it turn into what it did?
So with regards to that, the Germans came and they helped, but they came for mostly our crops. But the Belgians then came and they decided to make it about how we looked. And they actually got to the point where in 1933, they stamped cards with whether we were Hutu, Tutsi or Twa. So most people don't talk about the third group, the third tribe, but they do exist, and they're pygmy people, and they were part of the three, but they're very small. There's only 1% in Rwanda. And so it was the Belgians that came and basically made it a much bigger deal than it was, and it made it about how we looked. And so they took certain things like land from the Hutu, gave it to the Tutsi. And so aggravating, and essentially the Tutsis were the minority in charge of the majority, and that just made things a whole lot worse. And then they just left.
So, just like that?
Yeah. So that obviously set everything into motion and made it much, much worse.
Now, the genocide resulted in the Hutu slaughtering almost 1 million of the Tutsi. It was a barbaric event by any stretch of the imagination. People were slaughtered using machetes, using knives, using clubs, because bullets were perceived to be too expensive. Then they were left to rot in the streets for the dogs to eat. Were any of your family involved?
So thankfully no, because we were in Congo, so we were able to warn our family members when we moved to South Africa.
Okay.
And most of them got out, and so they went to different nations around. Unfortunately for us, our aunt wasn't really listening, and so she stayed because she didn't think it was that serious, because it wasn't really spread about that way. And so she stayed in Congo, and because she was married to a Congolese man and she's Tutsi, which was considered sort of like being a traitor, her and her 2 children were put in prison for a year. But there is a happy ending, and she obviously got out and everything is fine. But that's the extent that our family was affected, thankfully.
You were lucky, I suppose.
Yes.
The 24th anniversary of the genocide was on the 7th of April. What efforts have been made to educate people to ensure that something like this can never happen again?
So there's been various groups. that have come out. So I know there's one, 100 Days of Hope, and it's a charity that helped to remind people that even though this happened, this shouldn't define us as a nation. And as Rwanda as a whole, we've done loads of things to come into place. So we've helped survivors, we've put programs into place to, build houses for them, because a lot of them, some of the houses were looted, for example, and things like that. If their family members weren't killed, there was also the fact that they were made homeless. So there's been plenty of programs to help with that. And then as a government, we've tried to educate about the story, about what went down.
Now today, Rwanda is a relatively peaceful place to live. And I believe that people no longer want to use their tribal names. Is this because it relates back to the identity card and what your name is and what your tribal name is? Is this why?
Exactly, and they don't really want to make that forever our story. So I don't know, but for me personally, whenever I meet somebody who asks me where I'm from, and then I say I'm from Rwanda, there's the immediate, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm thinking, yes, I get that, thank you, but that was 24 years ago. And as a nation, we've moved on and we've gone further than just the 3 tribes and how many people were killed. And so as a whole, we just refer to each other as Rwandans. It's not actually allowed to talk about the tribes in our country.
But what tribe are you from, or do you talk about it in the past? Where are you from?
So my tribe was the Tutsi tribe, so we were the tribe that were being killed.
Do you consider yourself Tutsi anymore, or?
As a group of people, yes, because before colonization, that's what we were, Tutsi, Hutu, Twa. And so it had nothing to do with what they then came and redefined it as. At the time, it just meant how much land you owned. So that's still for me as a people, but I also call myself Rwandan because we don't want to talk about that really. We've moved on.
Okay. Yeah. Moving on. Many people will know about the Rwandan genocide, but they may not know how the nation went on to recover afterwards. Can you tell me how the people managed to put this behind them and move on to have a quality of life? What happened?
So there's a lot of things that's been happening, which is amazing. So I know that we're one of the top nations for coffee now, because apparently our coffee is amazing, and I've tasted it, it's great, and I don't like coffee, so that's really helpful.
Oh, right, okay.
And then there's other things like we are the largest we have the largest center, the Kigali Convention Center. That's one of the largest in Africa, so a lot of meetings with the parliament and all that happens there. Mm-hmm. And so different countries, we host different science events and science fairs, and we're basically trying to push forward that we are a smart nation beyond the genocide. So yeah, and then of course, looking back, we had forgiveness tribunals. And that was where essentially those who committed the killings were faced with the survivors, and then they would discuss what happened and then forgive each other. And so there are even photos taken where survivors were with those who killed their family members, and there's photos of them together, and that was in The Hague.
Wow,
3-4 years ago. Exactly, really powerful. So I love that we've tried to move on from that.
Many people say that while this was happening, while this 100 days of the genocide was happening, that the world stood back and watched and did nothing. What's your take on this?
I really do feel like that, because essentially what happened was the UN weren't allowed to intervene. So there were UN soldiers on the ground, but they weren't allowed to stop anything. And so I know one of the things that they could do, because some of the soldiers were frustrated, so one of the things they did was to shoot dogs that were trying to scavenge on the dead bodies, because that was the limit of what they could do. They couldn't intervene and help. As well as other nations came in and took all their citizens away. So it just felt like everyone came, took their citizens, and then just left us to figure it out, and that wasn't great.
The genocide ended when the RPF intervened. Tell me what happened.
Yes, so the Rwandese Patriotic Front are Tutsi-led, and they were led by Paul Kagame, who's now our president, and they essentially came in to try and stop what was happening, and then essentially led to the freedom of all the people, and then he became our president, and has maintained peace for so long. It's quite impressive.
You touched on it just there. Tell me what has happened to the political landscape since this genocide.
So one of the things I'm really proud of is that in the world, we're the only nation with the largest member of parliament, women in parliament. So that really is a proud moment. And in the parliamentary index globally, we're number 1, and then the UK is number 48. So I think it's really powerful that as a third world country to the world, we are quite high with how we deal with our parliament and how we deal with our politics.
Now, before we started filming, you were talking about the restrictions that have been put on you with regard to travel. Now, you've left the country 24 years ago. You've been living here in the UK for 17 years, and yet there's restrictions as to where you can and cannot go. Tell me more about that.
So because of things that had happened with the genocide and the aftermath, one of the rules were that Rwanda had decided that you can't be Rwandan unless it's from your father. And so I can only get it because my mother's Rwandan.
Okay.
So I had her passport and I was on it until I got my own, until I was 18. So at the age of 18, I was now faced with, what do you mean I can't be Rwandan anymore? So I then wouldn't take that. So I contacted members of parliament in Rwanda trying to overturn this. And then the ambassador here in the UK met with me and said, you know what, you're right, we'll give you the passport. And they gave it to me and my family. And then the law was overturned. So now you can be Rwandan whether your mother or your father is Rwandan. So
that's good news.
Exactly,
yeah.
Yes. So I got my passport back, which is great. But then after that hurdle, there was another hurdle, which is my dad, he's also a German citizen. And my right to be here is under EU law. And so that's caused a bit of a problem because I'm allowed to be here, I'm allowed to live here, but the Home Office are now contesting that. And so they've held my passport for the past 2 years, so I can't travel.
So you're allowed to be here, but you're not allowed to leave or
Yes.
to go anywhere else.
Exactly, which complicates things.
That's an interesting scenario, isn't
Yes.
it? Well, thank you very much, Anaïs Mutumba, for sharing with us your incredible story. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on another episode of IOHR TV, putting human rights into focus. Don't forget you can see other episodes on our website, and also you can keep right up to date on our social media feed. Until next time, goodbye.